Chapter 20. Rub-a-boo. On the morning of their departure, all 5 canoes were loaded by 3 a.m. Lake Superior lay still and silver gray. Pierre knew it was important to stay early and paddle hard on the big lake in the midsummer, because violent winds often made travel impossible by early afternoon. As the brigade pushed off from the pier, each voyager crossed himself and whispered a prayer before he took up his paddle. La Petite, choosing not to disturb the mist-quiet morning with a song, whistled a soft tune instead. Commander McKay and Emile and the other Hivernants had gone north the day before. New hands were hired on to replace those that wouldn't be returning. The previous morning, Emile had shaken Pierre's hand before he started up the famous portage and said, "Make sure you don't beat up Belly Boy too often." Belly Boy was a nickname Emile had used for Beloit since the day Pierre punched the bowman in the stomach. "I promise," Pierre said, laughing, "and you keep your powder dry." "Until next year?" Emile grinned, turning up the trail. "We'll see," Pierre called after him. After McKay checked one last bill of lading, he took Pierre aside and said, "You listened to Charbonneau and La Petite on the way to Montreal, lad. If you learn as much going home as you did on the outward trip, you'll be wintering with us soon." Then McKay reached in his pack and pulled out a leather-bound book. "I thought I'd loan you a bit of reading material to keep you occupied on the way home." Pierre's eyes widened and he opened the volume to the longest title he'd ever seen. The Journals and Letters of Pierre Gautier de Varennes de la Vérendrye and his sons. Pierre had always wanted to read about La Vérendrye, to the most famous of all French-Canadian explorers. "Thank you, sir," was all Pierre had a chance to say before McKay waved one last time to the crewmen he was leaving behind and started up the Grand Portage trail. That same afternoon, Muckwa stopped by their camp to say goodbye. The chief embraced Charbonneau and wished him luck on his many days' paddle. Then he turned and pumped Pierre's arms hard, calling him "my friend's friend," and saying, "You must visit us again soon. Kaniwa wishes you a safe journey, too. Perhaps you'll come back next season?" "Tell her to look for me next June," Pierre replied. Though Pierre would miss this place, he was glad to be heading home to Lachine. When he thought of Kaniwa and her straight-parted hair and shy smile, he longed for the gentler pleasures of home. Tired of smoke and grease and unwashed men, he was looking forward to simpler things, such as sitting at a clean table and eating a meal of his mother's roast chicken and blueberry pie, soaking in a tub of hot water, and sleeping on the soft ticking of his old bed. As the painted prows swung east, Pierre saw the dark eyes of Kaniwa and her quiet lodge up on the hill. He would return to Grand Portage. His first journey was made out of duty to his family, but next time he would voyage here on his own account. He'd been thinking a lot about what Mr. McKay had said about tending to his studies. If he could use his schooling to secure a place as an officer on the company someday, that would give him the best of both worlds. He could learn and profit and adventure all at once. One by one, the paddlers began their steady dip and pull. "So, what do you think of our new boat, Pierre?" Charbonneau asked proudly. "It looks narrower than our older one. You've got a good eye for canoes. It's speed we want. And just like the clipper ships back east, trimmer is faster." "She's a beauty," Pierre agreed. As he studied the clean new ash of the gunwales, he remembered his father telling him how important it was to pull his own weight. On the route home, he would make up for any weaknesses he'd shown earlier. "I'll paddle as I've never paddled before," he promised himself. Pierre strained with his arms and shoulders, forgetting that the leg and back are the key. He pulled hard and fast, forgetting that pace is everything to the canoeman. Soon he was forced to catch his breath, and before they cleared the harbor, his muscles ached. Suddenly he was angry with himself. How had he forgotten the Lond and Charbonneau's advice so soon? When he finally caught the old rhythm, he smiled, thinking back to his first days on the Ottawa. Pierre soon forgot his paddle altogether and cheated his work by dreaming. Time passed in a blur. The paddling and pipe stops fell into their familiar pattern as the sun tracked its way across the sky. A western breeze came by mid-morning and helped push them on. Anxious to take advantage of the conditions, La Petite and Charbonneau kept the rest stop short. "Work your blades, boys," one of the others would sing out. "When the old lady of the wind sings, it is sin not to fly." Scorning the pleasant weather as he scorned all things, Beloit was silent. By early evening, they'd traveled nearly 70 miles. Then Charbonneau steered his boat alongside La Petite's and called out, "That's Nipigon Point, just ahead. Should we call it a day?" Pierre's heart thrilled at the prospect of rest. "Fine with me, Charbonneau," La Petite replied, sculling his oar with practiced ease. "Though these fellows haven't pushed the issue," Charbonneau said, motioning with his paddle towards the crewmen. "I know they're itching to test the speed of their boat." Pierre turned angrily. He couldn't believe the man would suggest a race after they'd paddled for 14 hours. "I thought maybe you got beatings enough on our first trip to last you all the way back home," La Petite teased. "But this is a new boat." "Your men are the same, Charbonneau. Don't kid yourself. The canoe doesn't paddle itself." Then, turning to his crewmen, La Petite continued, "What do you say, fellows? Shall we give these amateurs a lesson?" A moment later, all 5 canoes were racing for Nipigon Point. Pierre paddled without enthusiasm. He thought, why not just save our strength for carrying the firewood and for taking the teasing that is sure to follow? It wasn't until they were halfway to shore that Pierre finally became excited about the race. La Petite's canoe was just off their port bow and opening up a half-length lead. Beloit turned to check the progress of the other 3 craft. Pierre assumed that the rear canoes were getting ready to pass them, as they usually did in the middle of a race. But Beloit grinned and yelled, "Pull, ladies, pull! We bury them!" Pierre turned and to his astonishment saw that their canoe was 2 lengths ahead of the next one. In his moment of inattention, he splashed the man ahead of him and nearly dropped his paddle in the lake. "Paddle, LePage," Charbonneau said, and cursed. Pierre whirled his blade. Here was their chance to avenge 6 long weeks of losing. As La Petite's canoe pulled ahead by a full length, the big man turned and teased them, doffing his cap and waving goodbye as if he were about to board a fancy carriage. "Let's learn them not to celebrate so soon," Charbonneau called. Beloit yelled, "Yes, yes," as the men pursed their lips and pulled for all they were worth. Charbonneau's canoe closed to a half of a length and was still gaining when La Petite glanced back, expecting to find a safe distance. Shocked, he took a big, sweeping stroke with a steersman paddle and yelled, "Press hard, fellows!" Pierre saw that 2 of La Petite's crew were startled by the sudden shout and missed their strokes. La Petite yelled again, but Charbonneau's men pulled all the faster. Though La Petite won by a paddle length, Pierre was elated to see the final canoe in the brigade still 100 yards offshore. "So, what do you think of the new boat now, Pierre?" Charbonneau said with a smile as he stepped into the water and turned their craft parallel to the beach so that the middlemen could unload. "It's hard to believe it can be that much faster." "It is not all the canoe. When you paddle a bad boat, it builds muscles." Charbonneau squeezed Pierre's biceps and made his eyes go wide. "Now we're ready for the races." Charbonneau's crew had their canoe unloaded before the last craft arrived. Standing with their arms crossed, Charbonneau claimed bragging rights. He waited until the last canoe pulled in, and then he waited still longer. When the men were convinced he wasn't going to speak at all, he yawned, like a man who had been waiting too long in the sun. "Could you tell me, gentlemen," he asked, "why soup tastes sweeter when it is warmed by another man's wood?" Laughter echoed up and down the beach. That evening, Pierre was surprised when Bellegarde made a delicious concoction called rubabou for supper. Made from pemmican and flour and a bit of sugar, it was rich in flavor compared to the ordinary ration of salt pork and corn. When Pierre noticed that La Petite had taken a place at the head of the table, he teased him. "Not only is our famous steersman fast on the water," Pierre said, "but he's quick to get at the cooking pot." The crewsman laughed. "Hush up and eat, LePage," La Petite countered. "Forgive me, sir," Pierre said, "but I am only a poor student learning how to paddle my canoe." As Bellegarde ladled up generous portions of his specialty, the men were quick to show their praise. "You're an artiste with a cooking pot, monsieur," Charbonneau said as he watched the greasy little man load his plate, "and your intelligence is surpassed only by the quality of the company you keep." "Pouring it at a bit thick, aren't you, Charbonneau?" La Petite called out from across the fire. "Talent needs praise to flourish." "Why don't you tell the truth?" La Petite insisted, "and admit that you're just happy to see someone else gather the wood for once." Several of the company seconded the comment. Besides, Charbonneau, La Petite continued, you forget I wintered with you up on the Red River, and I defy you to. And, La Petite continued, I got plenty sick of your whining about the rancid buffalo fat and rotten service berries that were bagged in the name of pemmican. But this, Charbonneau insisted, is finer and more delicate fare. Anyone can tell. La Petite caught Bellegarde's attention, asking, where was this pemmican made? There was a pause, when Bellegarde thought, I believe McKay said it came from Pembina? The men, knowing that Pembina was a post on the Red River, instantly burst into laughter. Pierre stared at his plate. The black fibers that he'd assumed were strands of dried buffalo meat looked suspiciously like hair. He leaned in La Petite's direction and whispered, is there ever hair in pemmican? Is there water in a lake? Pierre frowned. What sort of hair would it be? La Petite was still catching his breath from his hard laugh. It depends. It might be buffalo, coyote, prairie dog, human, who knows? Sometimes it might be a mix of several kinds of critters. Pierre looked down at his plate again. He was hungry for something simple, like boiled corn.